All right, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Yue Li. I'm a co-founder, CTO of MemVerge. So we're a very small startup in the Bay Area that focus on building the memory virtualization softwares. So today I'm very happy to share with you on our story on software-defined memory from the angle of the memory tiering and the in-memory data services. So I'm going to explain our motivations and also bring you some very interesting use cases for memory tiering and in-memory data services. So our motivation is actually quite simple. If you look at the modern infrastructure today, that's running, those buzzwords in machine learning, big data analysis. So essentially, those infrastructure calls for more memory. So it's just a few examples. So the machine learning model GPT-3 used for the natural language processing basically requires more, 175 billion parameters. So that accounts for more than 700 gigabyte memory for hosting this model. So if you want to run the inference, you probably need a very large memory machines to do the test, right? So the other one is if you look at the bioinformatics today, if you run this genome assembly, the modern genome assembly algorithms, it easily requires more than 500 gigabytes of memory for some non-human data sets, so on and so forth. So basically, your typical experience is that if you add more memory, it will make your compute much faster, right? So you can bring more data from disk to the memory, and also allows you to solve the problems you probably cannot solve before, right? Before, maybe you have to think about distributed computing or other algorithm or maybe external sort, something like that to solve those. But now if you have a memory, you come back to the original, the most simplistic algorithm and bring everything in the memory to compute. So memory is very good, right? But we know the problem is also very simple. So DRAM, the memory is also today, comparing to storage, the size is very, very small, right? Much smaller. Storage goes to petabytes, but if you look at servers today, still have 100 gigabyte memory, or at most 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte, right? So if you compare DRAM and storage, there's a very big gap. So DRAM is very small and very expensive, and storage is very inexpensive but very, very slow. So not suitable for in-memory workloads. So one of the goal we want to achieve is trying to basically nicely fill in the gap between the DRAM and SSD storage, such that you can actually expand your memory in an inexpensive way. So our story actually starts, as you know, we start working with the Intel's Optane persistent memory. So this is one of the candidates that we think it can actually fill in the gap. So it has very large capacity, it can go terabytes, per server, 6 terabytes per server very easily. It's less costly than DRAM. It has a reasonable performance, it's slower than DRAM, but it's much faster than SSD. We have been working with it for years, but unfortunately, you probably already heard about, right? Intel already discontinued this product, will be discontinued. But we think it's actually Intel's Optane actually opens up the evolution roadmap for the CXL. And if you, as they also discussed, actually in the future, the Intel's Optane actually was planned to move to the CXL bus as well. So our software actually is from beginning actually designed for that roadmap. So it's actually doesn't matter that the Intel discontinued this. So our software actually without modification today, it works very well on the CXL hardware. So this is actually our testing setup. In our lab, we already tested actually a couple of CXL early devices. These are some of the pictures. And here are actually some of the results running our software. And just to highlight some results here, basically you can see that we show the benefit of the memory expansion, memory bandwidth expansion. If you look at the bars here, just look at any of these three bars. The blue ones basically shows you run the workload totally on DRAM. The green bars shows that you run the workload totally on the CXL memory. And the black bar shows the software running on both CXL and the DRAM. And you can see that the higher the better. You can see the memory bandwidth gets increased when you are leveraging both CXL memory and the host DDR. So that basically shows the promise of the memory expansion as well as the capacity expansion brought by CXL technologies. So basically what we want to do, as I mentioned, essentially we want to build basically a software-defined memory that has multiple tiers, right? The starting with the DRAM that is fastest, then goes to the slower tiers, such as PMEM and CXL. And I do believe that persistent memory will return in the future as well, because it is promising as a very useful technology. And if you look at the storage before, right, today, the storage system in the cloud or in your data centers is already disaggregated, meaning that it's already external to your compute, right? And you access large amount of storage with storage and area network, and you can scale compute and storage separately. Similarly, with CXL technology, I believe that the memory also will get disaggregated, meaning that it will be pushed out of the server chassis, or a significant amount of memory will go out of the server chassis, and you can actually scale your memory and your compute independently with CXL. So this is what we basically imagine that will happen. In the future, you have servers, and you have the top of the rack of switch that manages those CXL memories, and you have memory pool chassis that contains only memory, no compute, no others, just memory. And this memory can be shared with multiple servers through some pool manager, such as software we provide. So more concretely today, we already built our software called Memory Machine that contains basically two components here. One is called transparent memory tiering. The other one is called memory snapshot. So the tiering is about composing different types of memory together, and snapshot is for protecting the memory running mentioned by Memory Machine. So I will just briefly explain these two components separately and with use cases. So first one is the memory tiering. So memory tiering is very simple. It's basically trying to combine the near and the far memory together to create a larger memory pool for your workload, right? So for example, here the tiered memory hierarchy, the total capacity is the local DRAM capacity plus your CXL or far memory tier capacity. And we have an algorithm that basically trying to monitor your memory access and try to put your hot pages in the fast tier and the cold pages in the far memory, such that you don't experience the big performance degradation caused by the far memory. And also, it's we provide everything is software definable, meaning that you can use software configuration to define the ratio between the near memory and the far memory according to your needs. If you want to optimize for cost, maybe you want to provision more code memory or far memory, or if you want to do better performance, maybe you give more DRAM to that. And it's totally tunable and also even actually auto-tunable as well. So one use case is actually we already running is I want to show this from a collaboration with the Berkeley lab, the DOE's Joint Genomics Institute. So one use case is actually the metagenome assembly. So metagenome assembly essentially is a technology basically trying to use genome sequencing to understand the species in a larger environment. So for example, they want to understand all the bacteria living in the wastewater, for example, right? So these data set, basically this algorithm, so requires you to input all these sampled genomes into the memory and trying to run the computation to understand machine learning or clustering, trying to understand what they are, right? So if here just basically some typical example from realistic data set, you can see that for most of these ones, at least they require more than 1 terabyte of memory to actually finish the compute. So DOE is actually using some very large, very powerful machines to run those, but still, if you for a very large data set, they still cannot run it, actually. So we work with basically with the researchers, professors from Berkeley lab, basically, and actually wrote a paper published a few months ago, basically, to talk about our experience running this using the tiered memory. And you can just want to highlight a few data here. You can see the MetaHitmer is one of the genome assembler invented by DOE and used by many researchers. And you can see that to run this data set, it requires actually more than 4 terabyte of memory to finish. And it's trading the performance with the amount of memory. It takes the shortest amount of time to finish, but it takes largest amount of memory to run. And if with a CXL and also with other memory expansion technology, we can actually easily allow this workload to finish, right? But before, they only have about 500 gigabyte servers that can never finish this workload, right? So this is the one significant benefit you can use to basically compute something you cannot compute before, right? That's very natural. And however, during many POCs and testing, we found also that the big memory, if you have large memory footprint, it actually presents lots of interesting challenges. Just to name a few, and you probably already experienced. If you have a database or have an application that uses lots of memory, and you want to save the state or save the results in the memory to the disk, it's very slow, right? So think about this, dumping a 1 terabyte of database into the disk. It's very slow. You have to serialize that, and you have to pay for the cost of the I/Os also. And of course, it's hard to write, it's slow to write to the disk, and it's slow to actually also load it back, right? If you want to, let's say there's a crash, you want to recover from the disk, it also takes forever to ship them. And also, if you just want to make a copy, it's very slow also, right? Maybe you want to create a replication in another machine, then you also have to pay for the I/O, network I/O, which is even slower. So essentially, if you have a large application, use lots of memory, and if there's a, let's say there's a crash, or there's a need to basically do a copy, then it's very slow, and there's a large penalty there, okay? So basically, to solve these issues, we further developed the in-memory data services. You know, just like those memory data services you created for storage systems, such as replication, snapshot, we actually developed similar algorithms and components for in-memory data. So the first instance we call it is actually in-memory checkpointing technology. So essentially, this is totally transparent to the application. There's no application modifications. And what it can do is actually it can persist your memory states instantaneously using a copy on write-based snapshot technology similarly used by the storage industry. And it can actually, once it can persist instantaneously, it can recover also instantaneously without actually doing I/O or reloading from the disk. So actually everything happens within tens of milliseconds instead of hours or tens of minutes. And furthermore, because it's a copy on write based snapshot technology, right? They can actually clone your memory states instantaneously, so without actually doing extra memory access. And most importantly, it does not require application modifications. So here's just I don't want to dive into the detail because I don't have enough time here, but just I want to mention a couple of highlights here. First of all, it saves in-memory data instantaneously using a snapshot technology. And once it can persist that, then essentially the snapshot itself can be cloned also across the machine, across the different servers, or inside the normal servers, we can actually clone multiple copies. And for the clone, the copy can be used for debugging or used for, let's say, improve your throughput and so on and so forth. Right? Once you have this, you have snapshot, you can actually replicate your snapshot, memory snapshot, to another memory server, and then you can also recover your workloads from another server. Think about if you want to, let's say, you want to migrate a running workload or machine learning workload or maybe database, you can actually take a snapshot, actually export it, import it to a different server, and recover there. So your snapshot, your application can continue running there without actually starting from the scratch. And of course, you can also back it up into the cloud and transfer to a different destination and so on and so forth. So in the next, I want to just show you a very interesting use case of this in-memory snapshot that can help to significantly accelerate the data analysis for genomics. So here we are looking at basic so-called single-cell sequencing analysis. So what is a single-cell sequencing analysis? It's very actually looks simple in the sense that it's a pipeline. So what it does is essentially takes the sequence data from a sequencer, and then it performs multiple stages of compute. For example, some stage clean up the data, some stage does some normalization, some stage, for example, running the clustering machine learning algorithm here and doing some comparison, and finally doing the visualization. Okay, so it's a long pipeline. And so we work with the customers. So basically, here's we experience is that the workload is very memory bottlenecked. So because you look at this one, each of these is actually a huge matrix. And for the single cell genomics, it has many data to many cells to look at. Each matrix is for a single cell. You have many cells, you have a large data to compute. So typically it requires terabytes of memory. And also it's very storage bottleneck because between each of the stage, it has to actually dump the intermediate results to the disk. Then the next stage will load it back and do another kind of compute and so on and so forth to pass it along. And also, it's very long running and it requires lots of parameter tuning. For example, you are running machine learning here, so sometimes the parameter is not right. You have to keep on rerunning this, meaning that reloading the data from disk and try a different set of parameters, so which takes a long time. For example, initially the stage, actually the pipeline looks like this. So you have multiple steps here, and each step you have to save it and reloading the data, then go to the next step. And so what we did is basically we removed all these disk I/O, save and restore with the in-memory snapshot. So that means that after each step, we just run an in-memory snapshot, and then we continue. So let's say if you want to do a parameter tuning here, you have to come back. We actually run an in-memory snapshot restore, which takes less than 1 second comparing to thousands of seconds. So that in this case, we actually use snapshot, in-memory snapshot, to persist the state and recover the state. So that basically is trying to avoid the I/O you paid to the storage. So as a result, essentially, if you're comparing the baseline on the left-hand side, if you use DRAM SSD to the compute, by removing the I/Os with the in-memory snapshot, you basically reduce the time from more than 20,000 seconds down to less than 10,000 seconds. Okay, and you can see that most of the reduction comes from the removing of the disk I/O by persisting and recovering everything from the memory. Okay, I think this is what I mainly want to cover. So in summary, I think for the future, if you want to be a big memory compute, the significant number of software are definitely needed for big memory compute. And we just showed 2 small instances of such software. The first one is memory tiering that composes different types of memory together into a large memory pool. And also, once you have bigger memory, also trying to solve the bigger memory challenges by providing some in-memory data service such as Snapshot to protect your memory and make your memory more agile. Okay, that's all. Thank you very much.